Imagine this, March 4th, 1829, Andrew Jackson's inauguration.
Oh, yeah.
Not some quiet, formal thing, but this massive crowd, 20,000 people just pouring into the White House.
Right, breaking furniture, china, chaos.
Exactly. Supreme Court Justice Joseph Story apparently called it the reign of King Mob. What an entrance.
It really was.
That moment, that, chaotic celebration, it was such a vivid snapshot of a new and pretty tumultuous era in American politics. So today we're taking a deep dive into democracy in America, looking at the period from 1815 to 1840, drawing a lot from Eric Foner's work here.
And it's such a crucial period. This is really when American democracy, well, for white men anyway, truly seemed to triumph. It became absolutely central to the nation's identity. But, and this is key, this expansion also threw these deep contradictions and limitations into really sharp relief.
Yeah.
It sparked these intense national debates over economic power, states' rights, and ultimately the future of the nation itself.
Yeah.
And all of it kind of embodied in Andrew Jackson.
Right. So our mission today is to unpack this fascinating time for you. We want to show how the key events, the figures, the themes, how they shaped who could participate in American life, and what freedom truly meant back then. And we'll do it so you're well-informed without needing a single visual aid. So let's jump in.
Great.
Okay, so the first big theme we need to tackle is this incredible expansion of voting rights, specifically for white men. What was really driving that?
Well, the push to get rid of property qualifications for voting, that actually started way back during the Revolution, but it really hit its peak in this period. By 1860, almost all states didn't require you to own land to vote anymore, especially the newer states joining the Union.
So the idea shifted.
Exactly. The whole concept of personal independence changed. It wasn't about owning property so much as owning yourself, your own labor, your own person. This empowered a huge new group of white men, and it made America stand out, Britain didn't get universal male suffrage until the 1880s. France was on and off.
That's a big difference. And this desire for the vote, it could get pretty intense, right? Like in Rhode Island.
Oh, absolutely. Rhode Island was the holdout, still clinging to property requirements.
Yeah.
So in 1841, you get the Dorr War. Basically, propertyless wage earners, folks who couldn't vote, got fed up. They drafted their own constitution, said all adult white men could vote, and tried to install their own governor, Thomas Dorr.
Wow. So what happened?
President John Tyler actually sent in federal troops to shut it down. The movement collapsed. But it really shows just how passionate white men were about getting the right to vote and, well, how much resistance there could be too.
Okay, so into this kind of messy, energetic political scene steps Alexis de Tocqueville.
Right, the French writer. He visits in the early 1830s, produces his famous book, Democracy in America. He actually came to study prisons, interestingly enough.
Really? Prisons?
Yeah, but he pretty quickly realized that if you wanted to understand America, you had to understand democracy itself. It was everywhere.
And what was his big takeaway?
His key insight, I think, was that democracy wasn't just about voting or institutions. It was, as he put it, a habit of the heart.
A habit of the heart. What does that mean?
It means it was a culture that fostered individual initiative, this belief in equality, again, among white men, and a really active public sphere. Lots of voluntary organizations, people getting involved.
So it defined American freedom itself. That seems like a big shift from the founders.
A huge shift. The founders were initially quite wary of, excessive influence by ordinary people. Tocqueville saw something completely different taking root.
And this era also had this information revolution. What fueled that?
Steam power. It revolutionized printing, made it way cheaper. This led to the mass circulation penny press papers, like the New York Sun, the New York Herald.
Penny press, so cheap newspapers for everyone.
Exactly. And they had a new style, too. Lots of sensationalism, crime stories, reporting on official misconduct. They really aimed for a broad audience.
And it worked.
Massively. Get this. By 1840, the U.S., with only 17 million people, had a higher weekly newspaper circulation than all of Europe combined, which had 233 million people.
Whoa. That's incredible. People were hungry for news.
Absolutely. And the lower printing costs weren't just for the big papers. It also allowed for alternative newspapers.
Like what?
Like Freedom's Journal, the first black newspaper, or The Liberator, the big abolitionist paper, and even the Cherokee Phoenix, the first Native American newspaper.
So more voices were being heard.
More voices, yes. But, and this is crucial, it also starkly highlighted the limits of democracy.
Right, because while the people ruled, who counted as the people was getting narrower in some ways.
Precisely. As those economic barriers for white men felt like needing property to vote, The racial and gender barriers actually got harder, more rigid.
And the justification changed, too.
Yeah, it shifted. It wasn't about economic dependency anymore. Now the argument was about natural incapacity. Essentially, white males were just declared inherently superior.
And you saw this reflected in culture.
Definitely. Racist imagery became common, like in minstrel shows with characters like Jim Crow.
That's grim. And the voting rights reflected this hardening, too.
Starkly. Think about this. In the Revolutionary era, no northern state actually barred black men from voting. But every state that joined the Union after 1800, except Maine, limited voting to white males only.
Every single one.
Almost. By 1860, only 5 New England states allowed black men to vote on the same basis as whites. And that was only 4% of the country's free black population.
So race effectively replaced class as the main boundary marker for political freedom.
That's a good way to put it. It helped create this sense of a shared white identity among diverse European groups.
Right.
But it very deliberately excluded others.
Okay, so while all this is happening with voting and identity, the nation's also dealing with the economic fallout from the War of 1812.
Right. There was this burst of nationalism after the war, sure, but the war also showed major weaknesses.
Like what?
Well, the first Bank of the United States, its charter had expired in 1811, so no uniform currency. Chaos. And transportation was terrible. It apparently took 75 days to get supplies from New England to New Orleans. 75 days.
Clearly not working for a growing nation.
Not at all. So this led President James Madison in 1850 to propose a plan for government-promoted economic development. We know it as the American system.
That was Henry Clay's term, right?
That's right, coined by Clay.
Hmm.
It had 3 main parts.
Okay, what were they?
A new national bank, a protective tariff on imported manufactured goods to help American industries, and federal money for roads and canals, internal improvements. You even had John C. Calhoun, who later becomes a big states' rights guy, pleading with Congress back then, let us bind the nation together, let us conquer space.
So did Congress go for it?
They did enact 2 parts. The Tariff of 1816, protecting industries like cotton textiles, and they chartered the Second Bank of the United States in 1816 for 20 years.
But not the roads and canals.
No. Madison actually vetoed the internal improvements bill right before leaving office. He worried it gave the federal government too much power, that it wasn't explicitly in the Constitution. Shows that tension was always there.
And the second bank, it became controversial fast.
Very quickly. It was a private corporation, remember, making profits, but it was also the government's financial agent. It issued paper money, and it was supposed to regulate local banks, make sure their paper money was backed by real value.
Supposed to. Sounds like it didn't work out.
It really failed in that regulatory role early on. The bank itself got caught up in the speculation fever after 1812.
What was driving that?
Europe needed American goods, cotton especially, and people were rushing west, buying land. Local banks and even branches of the Bank of the U.S. just printed tons of money for land purchases, particularly in the South.
Uh-oh. Bubble forming.
Exactly. And then it burst. European demand dropped. The bank called in its loans. Bam. Panic of 1819.
What were the consequences?
Widespread bankruptcies, unemployment. People really started distrusting banks deeply.
But didn't this lead to a big Supreme Court case?
It did. The panic prompted John Marshall's court to hear McCulloch v. Maryland in 1819. Marshall used it to strongly reaffirm broad federal power. He said the bank was constitutional, a legitimate use of Congress's power under the necessary and proper clause, a direct shot against that strict construction view that the government could only do what the Constitution explicitly said.
Okay, so economic turmoil, debates about federal power, and this is happening during the so-called era of good feelings.
Kind of ironic, isn't it? It was a time of one-party rule. The Federalists had faded. But good feelings didn't stop sectional conflict from erupting.
And Missouri was the trigger.
Missouri, yes.
Yeah.
In 1819, it applied for statehood. It was carved out of the Louisiana Purchase, and it already had over 10,000 slaves.
So the question was, would it be a slave state or a free state?
That was the heart of it. Representative James Talmadge proposed banning any more slaves from entering Missouri and freeing the children of existing slaves when they turned 25. This set off 2 years of furious debate. It really shattered the unity of the Republican Party. It was the first major national fight over slavery moving west.
How did they resolve it?
Through the Missouri Compromise of 1820, mainly worked out by Senator Jesse Thomas.
The deal was?
Missouri comes in as a slave state,
Yeah.
but to keep the balance in the Senate, Maine comes in as a free state.
Okay, balance maintained.
And, crucially, they drew a line across the rest of the Louisiana Purchase territory at 36 degrees 30 minutes latitude. North of that line, slavery would be prohibited forever.
Thomas Jefferson famously called this compromise like a fire bell in the night.
He did. He wrote it, "Awakened and filled me with terror." He saw quite clearly how deeply divisive the issue of slavery was even then.
Meanwhile, on the world stage, American nationalism is flexing its muscles a bit.
Yeah, particularly regarding Latin America. Between 1810 and 1822, Spain's colonies are rebelling, forming independent nations. There was a lot of sympathy in the U.S., and the U.S. was actually the first government to officially recognize these new countries in 1822.
Interesting. Were their systems similar to the U.S.?
In some ways, their new constitutions were actually more democratic initially. Many extended voting rights to Indians and free blacks and started gradual abolition of slavery, something the U.S. wasn't doing broadly.
Huh. And this leads to the Monroe Doctrine.
Directly, John Quincy Adams, who was Monroe's Secretary of State, drafted it in 1823. It laid down three main principles.
Which were?
1. No more European colonization in the Americas. 2. The U.S. stays out of European wars. 3. European powers shouldn't interfere with the newly independent Latin American nations.
So basically telling Europe, this hemisphere is our sphere of influence.
Pretty much. It's often called America's diplomatic declaration of independence, a bold claim for a still relatively young nation.
But back home, that nationalism was clashing hard with sectionalism, especially in the election of 1824.
Oh, yeah. That election was a mess. You had Andrew Jackson, the military hero, with broad support, but you also had John Quincy Adams, William H. Crawford, and Henry Clay all running seriously.
And nobody won outright.
No one got a majority of the electoral votes. So under the Constitution, it went to the House of Representatives.
And Clay played kingmaker.
He did. Clay finished fourth, so he was out. But he threw his support behind Adams. Adams wins. And then Adams appoints Clay as his Secretary of State.
Ah, the corrupt bargain.
Exactly. Jackson's supporters screamed bloody murder, claiming a deal was struck. That charge, fair or not, dogged Clay his entire career, probably kept him from ever becoming president.
And this election basically created the new party system.
It really did. Jackson's supporters started calling themselves Democrats, and the Adams-Clay alliance became the foundation for the Whig Party.
Yeah.
The second party system was born.
So Adams becomes president. Brilliant guy, apparently, but maybe not the most personable.
Not known for his charisma, no. But he had this grand vision for the nation. He was a strong supporter of the American system. He wanted federal programs for everything: agriculture, commerce, manufacturing. He even proposed a national university, a national astronomical observatory.
Ambitious stuff.
Very. And he famously said, "Liberty is power."
Hmm.
That view of an active, powerful federal government really alarmed people who believed in strict limits on federal authority.
Did he achieve much of it?
He managed to get a big tariff increase passed in 1828, but yeah, a lot of his grand plans didn't get off the ground. Too much opposition.
And his opponents were organizing. Enter Martin Van Buren.
Right, Van Buren, senator from New York.
Yeah.
He becomes the main architect of the new Democratic Party, organizing for Jackson's run in 1828. Van Buren was a different kind of politician. Maybe not a deep thinker like Adams, but a brilliant party manager, a master organizer.
And he had this idea about political parties themselves.
Yeah, a really powerful one for the time. The founders, remember, mostly saw parties as dangerous, divisive factions. Van Buren argued the opposite. He said parties were necessary. They provided a check on those in power, gave voters clear choices.
And crucially,
they could unite the country across sectional lines. By bringing leaders from North, South, and West together under common candidates and principles, parties could act as a bond of unity.
that's quite a shift in thinking.
A fundamental shift. He saw parties as the solution to the divisions Jefferson feared.
So the election of 1828, how did that play out?
It was a landmark. You had Van Buren's well-oiled Democratic machine plus Jackson's enormous personal popularity, and the campaign was nasty. Jackson's side played up his image as the tough frontierman, the hero of New Orleans, mocking Adams as an out-of-touch intellectual. They even used slogans like, "Vote for Andrew Jackson who can fight, not John Quincy Adams who can write."
Ouch. And Adams' side.
They hit back hard, called Jackson a murderer, referring to duels and military executions. They even attacked the morality of his wife, Rachel. Really personal, ugly stuff.
But the voters turned out.
In huge numbers. Nearly 57% of eligible voters cast ballots. That was more than double the previous election. And Jackson won, easily. A resounding victory.
So this election really showed the impact of
universal white male voting, combined with the organized national parties. It had totally transformed American politics. The age of Jackson was here.
And Jackson himself, a complex figure.
Deeply contradictory. Champion of the common man, came from humble beginnings himself. Yet, his vision of democracy explicitly excluded Native Americans. He wanted them pushed west, and African Americans who he believed should stay enslaved or be deported.
Strong nationalist, but also believes states should be important.
Exactly. He believed states should be the main focus of government activity, yet he fiercely defended the Union when challenged. And under him, politics became a kind of mass entertainment. Elections every year, parades, rallies, nicknames like Old Hickory.
And the spoil system.
Right, or rotation in office, as he called it. Basically rewarding party loyalty with government jobs. National conventions started choosing candidates too, replacing the old caucus system. And newspapers became openly partisan, pushing the party line.
So we see this clear split emerging. Democrats versus Whigs. What were the core differences?
Democrats were really worried about the growing gap between rich and poor. They distrusted what they called non-producers. Bankers, merchants, speculators, who they thought used government connections to get rich off the labor of the producing classes. Farmers, artisans, workers.
So their solution was?
Less government interference, a hands-off approach. Liberty, for them, meant private rights protected by local governments. They saw a powerful national government as a threat, so they cut federal spending, lowered the tariff, killed the national bank, even paid off the national debt by 1835, which is amazing to think about. And they tended to think individual morality was a private matter. They opposed things like temperance laws or bans on Sunday entertainment. A Democratic newspaper put it bluntly, "Liberty is understood to be the absence of government from private affairs."
Okay, and the Whigs?
Whigs were the heirs to federalism, in a way. They embraced the American system. They believed an activist national government was essential. Through protective tariffs, a national bank, funding internal improvements, they thought the government could guide economic development and create prosperity for everyone. For Whigs, liberty and power could actually reinforce each other.
And they had a different view on morality and government.
Yes, they believed government did have a role in shaping character. They supported public schools, building asylums, pushing for temperance laws. Many evangelical Protestants were drawn to the Whigs, believing government could help instill moral principles. So a really fundamental difference in philosophy about freedom and the role of government.
Okay, let's turn to the major crises of Jackson's presidency. First up, the nullification crisis. This starts with the tariff.
The Tariff of 1828, yes. Southerners called it the Tariff of Abominations. It raised taxes on imported manufactured goods and raw materials, hitting states like South Carolina, which relied heavily on imports, particularly hard.
And they threatened to nullify it. What did that mean?
It meant they claimed the right to declare a federal law null and void within their state's borders, basically refusing to enforce it.
And the main theorist behind this was?
John C. Calhoun, who was actually Jackson's vice president at the time. He secretly wrote the South Carolina Exposition and Protest. His argument was that the Union was a compact of sovereign states, and each state kept the right to block unconstitutional federal laws.
But it wasn't just about the tariff, was it?
Not entirely. The economic complaints were real, but underneath, South Carolina's powerful planters feared something bigger. That if the federal government could impose this tariff, maybe one day it could interfere with slavery itself. That was the deep fear.
This led to that famous Senate debate.
The Webster-Hayne debate in 1830. Daniel Webster, for the Union, gave that incredibly famous speech, arguing the Constitution was made by the people, not the states, making the federal government sovereign. Nullification, he said, was illegal, treasonous, ending with liberty and union, now and forever, one and inseparable.
And Jackson made his position clear, too.
Very clear. At a White House dinner, looking straight at Calhoun, Jackson toasted, "Our federal union, it must be preserved." Calhoun immediately shot back, "The union next to our liberty most dear." The tension was palpable.
So how did the crisis escalate?
In 1832, South Carolina actually passed an ordinance nullifying a new, slightly lower tariff. Jackson was furious. He saw it as disunion, plain and simple.
What did he do?
He got Congress to pass the Force Act in 1833, explicitly authorizing him to use the Army and Navy to collect the tariff duties in South Carolina if necessary.
Did it come to that?
No, thankfully. Henry Clay, the great compromiser, stepped in again. With Calhoun's help, they brokered a new compromise tariff in 1833 that lowered duties even further over time. South Carolina then withdrew its nullification of the tariff, though they made a point of nullifying the Force Act just to show they could. So Calhoun
was now totally alienated from Jackson. He resigned as VP and eventually joined the Whigs. The crisis showed Jackson's commitment to the Union, but also the deep sectional fault lines.
Okay, so Jackson defends federal power against a state, but his approach to Native Americans was very different.
Radically different. His commitment to national sovereignty did not extend to Indian nations living within the U.S. One of the first major laws of his administration was the Indian Removal Act of 1830.
What did that do?
It provided federal funds to basically uproot the 5 civilized tribes, the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole, from their ancestral lands in the Deep South.
Forcing them where? West of the Mississippi River, to what was considered Indian territory, mostly present-day Oklahoma. And this completely rejected the older Jeffersonian idea that Native Americans who adopted civilized ways could be assimilated.
And the Cherokees, for instance, had done that, hadn't they?
Absolutely. They had established schools, adopted written laws, a constitution modeled on the U.S., became successful farmers. Many even owned slaves, adopting Southern economic models. Yet Jackson consistently called them savages and fully supported Georgia's moves to seize their lands.
Didn't the Cherokees try to fight this legally?
They did. They took their case all the way to the Supreme Court. There were a couple of key cases. In Worcester v. Georgia in 1832, Chief Justice John Marshall actually ruled in favor of the Cherokees.
Really? What did the court say?
Marshall declared that Indian nations were distinct political communities, that Georgia's laws had no force within Cherokee territory because their treaties were with the federal government.
So a legal victory for the Cherokees.
A legal victory, yes. But Jackson essentially ignored it.
Ignored the Supreme Court.
Famously defiant. He supposedly said, John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it. Whether he actually said those exact words is debated, but his actions spoke volumes. He wasn't going to protect the tribes.
So removal went ahead.
Tragically, yes. With legal options exhausted, the federal government forced about 18,000 Cherokees off their land during the winter of 1838-1839 under Jackson's successor, Martin Van Buren. This is the Trail of Tears. At least a quarter of them, maybe more, died on the brutal journey west from exposure, disease, starvation.
Horrific.
It was. And there was armed resistance, too, like the Second Seminole War in Florida, which was long and bloody. This whole policy just reinforced that racial definition of who belonged in America, who had rights. Indians east of the Mississippi became, as Foner puts it, almost a curiosity.
So states' rights, Indian removal, and then the third major battle.
Yeah.
The Bank War.
Yes. The Bank War. This was maybe the central political fight of the Jacksonian era. Jackson and many of his supporters just deeply distrusted the Bank of the United States. They saw bankers as these non-producers, getting rich without physical labor, manipulating the currency.
They didn't like paper money.
They preferred hard money, gold and silver. They felt the bank's paper money hurt regular wage earners because its value could fluctuate, reducing their real income.
And the head of the bank, Nicholas Biddle.
Biddle was smart, powerful, maybe a bit arrogant, and aristocratic Philadelphian. He had actually managed the bank pretty effectively, stabilizing the currency, keeping local banks in check. But he also kind of proved Jackson's point when he boasted to Congress that his bank had the power to destroy any state bank it wanted.
Not a great thing to say if people already think you have too much power.
Exactly. Democrats seized on that. Should any institution, private or public, wield that kind of power? They called it the monster bank, this dangerous mix of government power and private economic privilege.
So how did the confrontation happen?
Biddle's allies in Congress decided to push for an early renewal of the bank's charter in 1832, even though it wasn't due to expire until 1836. They thought they could force Jackson's hand before the election.
Jackson saw it as a challenge.
He saw it as political blackmail, and he responded with maybe the most important document of his presidency, his veto message.
What was the core argument?
He vetoed the recharter bill, arguing it was simply unacceptable in a democracy for Congress to create such a concentrated source of power and privilege that wasn't accountable to the people. He framed it as defending the humble members of society, the farmers, mechanics, and laborers, against the rich and powerful elite favored by the bank.
And this veto, it changed the presidency.
Significantly. Jackson was really the first president to use the veto as a major policy weapon, not just on narrow constitutional grounds. And he appealed directly to the public for support over the heads of Congress. Whigs were outraged. They accused him of acting like a king, King Andrew I, trampling on the legislature. You see those political cartoons?
But the public sided with Jackson.
His message resonated. He won re-election in 1832 by a landslide. The bank was dead.
Okay, so the bank is gone. What takes its place?
Well, Jackson didn't even wait for the charter to expire in 1836. He ordered federal funds removed from the Bank of the United States immediately.
Where did the money go?
Into select state banks. chosen often for their political loyalty to Jackson. They quickly got nicknamed pet banks.
And the person who carried out that order?
His Attorney General, Roger B. Taney. Jackson later rewarded Taney by appointing him Chief Justice of the Supreme Court when Marshall died.
So without the national bank regulating things, what happened with these state banks?
Predictably, perhaps, they started printing a lot more paper money, soft money. The value of banknotes in circulation just exploded. It went from about $10 million in 1833 to nearly $150 million by 1837.
Inflation.
Big time. Prices rose dramatically, which meant real wages. What workers could actually buy went down. And you got another speculative bubble, especially in land. People were using this questionable paper money to buy up huge amounts of public land out west.
Selling off federal land like crazy.
In 1836 alone, the government sold 20 million acres. That's 10 times what it sold just 6 years earlier.
This sounds unsustainable. Another crash coming.
Absolutely. The Panic of 1837. There were kind of two main triggers.
What were they?
First, Jackson himself got worried about the speculation. In July 1836, he issued the Species Circular, demanding that government land only be bought with gold or silver specie. That suddenly popped the paper money bubble for land. Second, events across the Atlantic. The Bank of England started demanding American merchants pay their debts in London using gold and silver, not paper. Plus, British demand for American cotton slumped.
A perfect storm.
Pretty much. These things combined triggered a major economic collapse in the U.S. It was followed by a deep depression that lasted pretty much until 1843.
What did that look like on the ground?
Businesses failed everywhere. Farmers lost their land because crop prices tanked. Tens of thousands of city workers lost their jobs. The early labor union movement basically got wiped out for a while. You see these period drawings of banks being mobbed, idle docks, widespread hardship, and many blame Jackson's policies.
And the poor president left holding the bag was?
Martin Van Buren, Jackson's hand-picked successor, elected in 1836, just as things were starting to unravel.
What did his administration do about the economy?
Their main response was the independent treasury system, which finally got approved in 1840. The idea was to completely separate the federal government from the banking system.
Yeah.
Federal funds would just be held in the Treasury Department itself in gold and silver, not deposited in any banks, state or national.
Did that help in the short term?
Not much with the Depression itself, but it was the Democrats' long-term answer to the bank issue.
And the panic had huge political consequences, too.
Massive. It really hurt the Democrats. And the Whigs saw their chance in the election of 1840. And ironically, they used the very mass democratic politics techniques that Van Buren himself had perfected.
How so?
They ditched their main leader, Henry Clay, seen as too elite maybe. Instead, they nominated William Henry Harrison.
Near hero, Battle of Tippecanoe.
Exactly. And they ran him without a real platform. Their whole campaign was imagery.
The log cabin and hard cider campaign.
That's the one. They portrayed Harrison, who was actually from a wealthy Virginia family, as this simple man of the people, born in a log cabin drinking hard cider. Total fabrication, but brilliant politics.
And his running mate.
John Tyler, a former Democrat from Virginia who'd broken with Jackson over states' rights and joined the Whigs, a ticket designed to appeal broadly.
And the voter turnout?
Astonishing. 80%. Unprecedented. And Harrison won in a landslide. The Whigs had beaten the Democrats at their own game.
But their victory was brief.
Extremely brief. Harrison gave the longest inauguration speech in history, caught pneumonia, and died just 1 month into his term.
Wow. So Tippecanoe and Tyler, too, becomes just Tyler.
Just Tyler. And Tyler was, at heart, still more of a Democrat on many issues than a Whig. He vetoed almost everything the Whigs tried to do. A new national bank bill, higher tariffs, things central to their platform.
So his own party turned on him.
Completely. His entire cabinet resigned, except Secretary of State Daniel Webster for a bit. The Whigs basically kicked him out of the party. He became a president without a party.
What does that whole episode show?
Tyler's presidency, or lack thereof in terms of accomplishment, really hammered home just how central political parties had become. You couldn't govern effectively without strong party backing. So this whole period, from expanding the vote to the economic booms and busts, the bank war, nullification, Indian removal, the rise of parties, it just shows how incredibly dynamic and often deeply conflicted American democracy was becoming.
Wow. Yeah. What an incredible journey through a really, truly transformative period in American history. It's amazing how much happened between 1815 and 1840. We've seen democracy expand, at least for white men, but become much more exclusionary for others.
Right. A real paradox there.
We've seen the first attempts at national economic planning, the wild swings of early finance, those intense battles over slavery's future and federal power.
And Andrew Jackson, right at the center of so much of it.
Hmm.
Such a contradictory figure, but leaving this huge mark on the presidency, on politics itself.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this era, 1815 to 1840, it really did lay the groundwork for so much that came later. The Civil War, arguments about government's role. You see the seeds here. It was a time the nation was really wrestling with its identity, its economy, its core values, trying to figure out what it wanted to be. Soaring ideals mixed with some pretty harsh realities.
Those tensions you mentioned, nationalism versus sectionalism, federal power versus states' rights, who gets included, who gets excluded, they were really brought to a head.
And they didn't go away.
No, definitely not. So for you, our listener, maybe here's something to think about. How do those debates from that era about who the people really are, or what liberty means, is it just about private rights the government leaves alone, like the Democrats tended to argue? Or is it also about the government actively promoting opportunity or even moral growth, like the Whigs believed?
Right.
Who do those competing ideas still shape our discussions today about freedom, about what government should or shouldn't do? It's fascinating to see the echoes.
It really is. The language changes, but some of the fundamental questions remain remarkably similar.
Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into democracy in America.
We hope you feel more well-informed, maybe a little more curious about this intricate, messy, but crucial period of American history.
Until next time.